Paris, chérie, mon beau Paris, say to
This photograph's nice, if a little poignant. It's an old dog on a chilly night in Paris in December, mooching around a grocery store. I don't know if the dog was part of the grocery store or just happened to be hanging around outside, but he looked so forlorn, so sad, and so hopeful. Every time someone came out of the store, his head would come up and he'd turn round a little bit slowly, maybe a bit painfully, seeing if there was anything interesting for him, and there wasn't. So he's sort of hanging around there. And it caught my eye from the other side of the street when the sun was going down on a photo tour in the Latin Quarter. We were looking for ideas, me and my companion, for the afternoon, and there he was, just across the street. It was getting dark, so the light was getting a bit more difficult. You had to put the old ISO up to 1600 I normally do when it gets to night time. And but because it's getting more difficult to get the picture sharp, I often go for the non-sharp picture using blur creatively, which I'm a big fan of. But something I always talk about is there's a thin line between using fuzziness, using blur creatively, so that people say, "Oh, that's a nice artistic effect." Could be an impressionist painting, and saying, "Well, it's nice, but shame there's so much camera shake, or shame you didn't manage to get it sharp." And that's where you know that you've failed in your artistic endeavour, when people think it's blurred and a shame rather than a gorgeous impressionistic effect. So I'm obviously going for the latter. No doubt some people will recognize the former in this shot, but it was funny because the person I was with, when I said, "Oh, I've got a shot and it's blurred," and she said something like, "Oh, that's a shame." But in fact it's not a shame, because a blurred photograph is much more interesting sometimes than a sharp one. And as I say in the blurb next to this photograph, my creative aim is to create images halfway between photographic reality and artistic impressionism. So blur is a very good tool for that, but you have to make sure people think that you meant to blur it, otherwise it's just a bad snap. Here in this case, and it's by chance, the effects are by chance, as is very often the case. The dog is a big black blob. The centre of the dog, the middle of its body, is rendered faithfully black. But because either the dog or the camera was moving, what's happened is the things which don't have a big mass to them, such as his head and his legs, have become half shadows, half transparent, which gives a lovely feeling of not lasting, of there's a really good word, I wish I could remember, ephemeral or ethereal image, almost as though he's a ghost, almost as a metaphor for our short span of time on this planet, which is a nice thing. And because of the blur, you can see the colours of the fruit and so on, but it's slightly blurred, and I've emphasised that and concentrated on the blackness of the shadow and the brightness of the fruit together. There's other elements in the shot. There's the post on the side. I left that in to give a kind of a frame on this side. The dog's off towards the end of the shot here. Often it's considered a good idea, and it's more pleasing to have something which is moving have space to move into. But exactly in this case, that's maybe not the point. Maybe the point is he hasn't got anywhere to go, or he's moving out of the shot in a kind of sad, unwanted way. So I think having him near his nose and the direction he may be going in, although he was standing still, right next to where he would go, basically exit stage left or whatever, works here. So quite a few different elements there. I had to manipulate it a bit because it was in bad light. It was a bit mushy as a photograph, so I did a few things to make it respectable again. Still not worrying at all about the fact that it was blurred, making that part of the composition. So don't worry if things are getting dark. You can always play around later. Set a high ISO, I'd say at least 1600, but bearing in mind the sort of blur you want. Is it going to be blurred just because you can't hold the camera straight? Is it because you're going to move the image and pan with something that's moving? Up to you. But there's a nice, if slightly poignant shot from a chilly end of afternoon, beginning of evening walk in the Latin Quarter in Paris.
Depuis que je suis à Paris, le jour et la nuit, je suis gris. J'ai compris la douceur de vivre. Je suis fou de joie, je suis ivre. Depuis que je suis à Paris.